very much indeed, Chris. So just a reminder, it's interactive, but what we're going to do is we're going to have all four speakers up first, and then we'll take the questions in a group so that we can try and create as much Q&A as possible and as much knowledge for you as we possibly can. So our next speaker is John Ryan of Zenobē. John has 20 years experience in the IT industry, working for some well-known brands or storied brands within the Irish software sector, Entropy and Expert Edge, and is going to chat to us a little about security and enterprise risk management.
Thanks a lot, Conor. Welcome everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. The greyer my hair gets, the more often I hear the word veteran in terms of my position in the industry. It's very disconcerting, but sure, I have to live with it, I guess. What I really want to talk to you about here is this morning is about measurement in IT security. There was a management consultant, Peter Drucker was his name. He's Austrian, and his philosophy is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Very Germanic approach, I guess, but it does seem to work, and it's the philosophy that's been taken up in a lot of organizations in terms of their management. And I think it's something that we in the IT industry can learn, because we often throw a lot of technology at problems, but we don't always measure the effectiveness or the success of those technologies. And I think one of the key pillars of ISO is the idea of measurement. To set your objectives, set your goals, measure, and then also evaluate. So yeah, the terminology, measurement and PDCA, if any of you have been involved in ISO, PDCA is one of the things you will hear about a lot, which is plan, do, check, and act. So it's very much a closed loop. You're evaluating your performance, you're checking yourself against your objectives, and you're changing your posture to be more effective. But measurements in security can be challenging. We always get the questions of how do you measure the success of your firewall, how do you measure your backup procedures, how do you measure security? And it is a challenge, but we would take the approach that you need to be smart about it. You need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Those are the type of things you need to take into account when you're looking at your security environment. And particularly time-bound, I think, is the challenge, because whatever about your accounting practice, where you send out your invoice and you measure the result and you follow up, you have time in which you can evaluate the process and make the changes. With security, your time isn't necessarily always on your side. Also, I think there are a number of other challenges that face the IT security industry. Escalating attacks. It was mentioned this morning already in the news twice this morning about the number of escalating attacks. I visit a lot of customers, and in the last 6 weeks, the word ransomware has come up at every single conversation. So we're seeing the effects of some targeting attacks, specifically in Ireland, in the last few months. And it's been very debilitating for companies. They've been challenged in addressing it, in how to handle it, and actually how to identify it in a timely fashion. The reality is the perimeter of the organization is disappearing, and so we are a lot more open. We're sharing a lot more information. We are sharing with partners, being more collaborative, and as a consequence of that, it's making it easier for the attackers, who are very well organized, very structured, to compromise our networks. I would say, in fact, that in most cases, the attackers are probably more organized than we are ourselves in IT security. I know, for instance, in some of the ransomware events, you can get your service in 4 different languages, 5 different languages, depending on the country you're calling from. So they're very well organized, they have the funding, and they have the skills to make their attacks effective. The complexity of our organizations is also increasing significantly. The number of products we actually use to implement our security is growing at an enormous rate. I was in a relatively small organization yesterday, about 80 people in the financial services industry, and within the first 3 minutes, we had listed out 15 security products that they were deploying to try and protect their environment. The big issue with that, how do you manage it? how do you measure the effectiveness of that security environment? And thirdly, the big issue is the availability of skilled staff to assist you with this process. There was a survey carried out by Cisco last year, which indicated that there was about between 500,000 and 1 million unfilled positions in IT security globally. I think that number has increased. I believe alone the CIA and the Homeland Security, etc., are looking for about 40,000 to 50,000 IT security professionals. So you're in a good position if you're in IT security. I'd get my CV ready. There's probably plenty of jobs out there for you. I'd advise your kids to get into it as well. My kids ignore me when it comes to this sort of thing. They ignore me when it comes to most things, actually. But I think there is a challenge for organizations to actually have the skills that they need to manage their security effectively. And so we see a move towards an outsource model where you take responsibility for your security, but you get third parties to help you manage it. And we're seeing that specifically in the area of measurement. Just a quick look at the history. You know, the environment isn't changing. These are information from a number of different sources showing the growth of security incidences, the growth of vulnerabilities, and the growth of data loss incidents. The numbers are pretty insane. You know, up to billions of records lost every year through IT security breaches. The complexity of those incidents. And the other thing that's happening, I'm not sure it's very clear on the top slide, but as you go across from left to right, the colours disappear and it becomes much more of a grey area. The grey area indicates that the cause of the breach is unknown. So a lot of organisations are now beginning to stop the breach and try to move on. But unless you learn from your experiences, you may move on, but you'll be breached again and again and again. And that's why it's so important to understand your security posture. I think the other thing that's happened, I mentioned earlier that we went to that company and they had 15 products that we could list off straight away. It's a lot worse in larger organizations. We have situations where there's 60, 70 products provided by 20, 30 vendors. So you have this mishmash of products that you have to manage on an ongoing basis. And we're seeing a change in that space. We're seeing them becoming more consolidated and a change in the industry. If you take the top 4 players in IT security, IBM, we're an IBM partner, we use their technology to deliver our services. Symantec, McAfee, Cisco, not one of them has more than 8% market share. So between those 4, there's probably about 30% market share. That means that the remainder 70% is split between the myriads of IT security vendors. So the challenge really is about trying to consolidate all those into areas where you can manage and where you can communicate between all those different products to give you a system that can protect you. A bit like an immune system of the body, where all the different pieces communicate and operate together. And at the core of that is your security intelligence, your ability to be able to understand what's happening on your network, interrogate, interpret, and make the appropriate actions to protect your organization. So we see security intelligence sitting at the core of everybody's security posture. We would also say there is a difference between being compliant and secure. Now, I know here this morning we're talking about ISO and the requirement to be compliant with ISO. We would see it very much as a foundation. It's not the end goal. It's very much about building your processes, your procedures, but be vigilant to continuously to keep ahead of the game and to make sure that you are not only being compliant, but you're actually being secure. I think the slide actually shows the difference. It can be easy to be compliant. It's not often that easy to be secure. And there is a view out there, and again, this is, I think, John Chambers came up with it first. I think it's been reiterated by the FBI and by many others, and that is that there are only 2 types of organizations, those that have been hacked and those that don't yet know that they've been hacked. or the FBI would say that there is those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked again. And I think every organisation, whether they believe it or know it, will fall into those categories. So just to use a case study to illustrate some of the points I want to make. Just a show of hands. Who in the audience has heard about the Target breach? Practically everybody. They always say it's good to ask a question that everybody knows the answer to, so that's a positive thing. So I'm just going to give some bit of a case study on the Target breach and maybe some of the mechanisms that could be helped to have prevented it. If I can get the mouse to work.
The number of victims of a holiday season data breach at Target has gotten even larger. The company now says the personal information, including credit and debit card numbers and PINs, of 70 million customers was stolen, much more than the 40 million originally reported back in December. The breach happened between November 27th and December 15th, as the holiday shopping season was heating up. An ongoing investigation of the breach shows more personal information, including phone numbers, emails, were stolen. Customers won't be liable for the cost of any fraudulent charges as a result of the breach. Target is also offering a year of free credit monitoring and identity theft protection to customers that shopped at stores. Individuals will have 3 months to enroll in the program. Target said it will provide more details on that next week. Bob McCall, Associated Press.
So you heard it all before, but the numbers are frightening, and it's actually just one incident of many that have happened, and the numbers are escalating as we heard this morning. So I just want to do a quick case study of how this breach actually happened. It actually started where the hackers infiltrated a third party. Fazio Mechanical was the name of the company that they infiltrated, who were a supplier to Target. They actually managed their air conditioning systems. And they stole credentials from Fazio, which allowed them to gain access to the Target network. In there, they compromised a server, Windows server, and they downloaded some malware onto that server. From there, they took the malware from the central server and distributed it out to the point-of-sale systems across the entire organization. Thousands of point-of-sale systems. They then set up a communications from the point-of-sale systems back to the server to actually bring the data that they were collecting from the point-of-sale onto a server in the organization. And then they set up a backdoor to allow the information that they gathered to be sent out of the organization to a staging area that they had outside. And that all happened over a period of about 2 months. The interesting thing is Target were PCI DSS compliant, and that goes back to the point I was making earlier, that just because you're compliant doesn't necessarily mean that you're secure. So if you look at the timeline, the breach of the Fazio Mechanical happened in September 2013. They gained their first access to the Target network a little later, sometime in about a month later, early November. They downloaded the malware sometime in middle November, and they activated the malware towards the end of November. Again, we were talking earlier about how organized and targeted these organizations are. So this weekend is Thanksgiving weekend in the US, where there's a huge amount of shopping. It's a bigger event than Christmas. So they're targeted their attack to the time when it would have optimum return. In other words, the number of credit cards that they would gather would be optimum. And during the process, all the typical controls, pieces of software, that an organization of this nature would have did trigger. So they had a solution called FireEye. We sell FireEye here in Ireland. It's a great solution. It identifies zero-day malware. So that triggered and identified that there was a problem. However, it had triggered before when there was a smaller problem and when the attack wasn't as concerted. So they didn't have any context for these triggers. They didn't know what happened before. They weren't monitoring what happened afterwards. And so they ignored it. They also didn't have context around what business assets were being attacked and where the malware was potentially going. So they didn't understand the business context of the attack. Then subsequently, having the original payload downloaded to the server, they started sending the information out to the point of sales. The point of sales and the FireEye solution triggered again, they ignored it because it wasn't correlated. They weren't also looking at network traffic. One of the issues that they should have been looking at was the fact that this server, which was used as a staging area, normally communicated within its own network. Over this period of time, it started communicating with all the point of sale systems all over the country. So they didn't have a baseline of their network as to see what was natural operation and what was unusual operation. And that's one of the areas where they didn't have enough visibility. And they still ignored the issue. And then in 12th of December, they were informed by the Department of Justice that they were under attack and that credit cards were being stolen. And as we saw, it started off, they thought it was 40 million, it eventually went to 70 million. So about 50% of all Americans who use credit cards were potentially affected by the breach. So a serious issue in terms of understanding their network and being able to monitor what the reality of their network, what was happening on their network in reality really was. So I guess the big issue we're talking about here is being able to look at things in context. And the fact of being able to identify what's happening from a global point of view rather than a point-by-point solution within your network is the key. So one of the key areas we would say to look at to help protect yourself in these situations is to use security intelligence and anomaly detection across your environment. And what we're really talking about here is giving your staff the ability to be able to collect security event data, to be able to identify anomalies on the network, to deploy the solutions that can help them do that, and to monitor it on an ongoing basis. We would also say that your key aspect here has to be to identify your key assets, your crown jewels. In the case of Target, the crown jewels were credit card information. So the aspect they need to look at is what systems within the organization take credit card data, where is it stored, how valuable is it, is it being accessed by non-appropriate personnel, is there changes in the profile of the data. So it's really about looking at the assets and putting a value on those assets and focusing the effort to those assets. And the third area we would say is that you need to prepare for the inevitable. As we mentioned earlier, there's only two types of organizations, that those have been hacked and those that don't yet know they've been hacked and that will be hacked again. So it's important that you have an incident response plan to address the issue when it does happen and to highlight the issue as quickly as possible so that you can make sure that you respond effectively and you minimize the impact of that breach within your organization. I guess we've been doing IT monitoring solutions for many years. I would say probably I've been involved in it for 15 years. And we started off really looking at logs and events information. So we're really looking at purely some triggers within the organization. And that was fine from the point of view of auditing and reporting. So we could report on how many login failures we had last year, how many credentials were lost, how many times there was a success followed by failure followed by success in terms of a login. But that was really looking at it historically. So we're looking back and saying, well, a month ago, this is what actually happened. Well, a month ago is way too late. We now need to be looking at it on an interactive basis and looking at it second by second to try and identify what's actually happening in the organization. If you look at the recent ransomware attacks, your time that you have to respond is very limited, and the consequences can be very, very dramatic. We had a customer who identified that they had an attack 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. It had already encrypted about 3 terabytes of data. They were about to shut up shop for the weekend and go home when they identified that the breach. If they hadn't identified it at that point, by the time they got in on Monday, the entire volume of their storage would have been encrypted, and it would be into a really disastrous situation. So timing of your identification of the problem is key in terms of being able to respond effectively. And so what we're looking at now is what we used to collect back then versus what we collect now, which is real-time contextual information, asset information, vulnerability information, flow information, to be able to pick out that key element that you need to do to make sure you respond effectively. So we're moving from, is that 20 minutes? 25, sorry. I'm under pressure. So we're moving from the auditing and reporting much more to looking at real-time security events by gathering the information, analysing it, making sure that we can see what the reality of what's actually happening on the network. We provide this as a service. We talked at the outset that getting the resources is a challenge. So we provide this very much as a service rather than you actually hiring all these people, setting up your SOC, training them, learning the technology. Our key role here is about gathering those logs, putting context to them, and being able to identify that one nugget of information that will help you identify that security issue within your organization. So if we go back to the target issue, we would have identified if they had the right systems in place with the right context, right at the time of that first trigger, they would have been able to look at what's actually happening on the network and be able to identify the anomalies that were there and being able to close the window in which they were exposed from probably 6 weeks down to hours or days, which is key in terms of delivering a solution. And given the time pressure, I just want to bring just one more small video, which I hope I can get to play. And you saw the issue with in terms of the target breach. Please. And we would see, hopefully, that this is the type of coverage your organizations will get as long as you put in your ISO properly.
This just in, 50 million customers' data was not compromised this morning in a security breach that didn't happen. We're going to have more on this story as it doesn't unfold.
It's certainly not going to be a dramatic day on Wall Street.
Not at all, not at all. What do you think about the breach that didn't happen?
What do I think? I think it's totally acceptable.
Sir, what went right? What went right?
Everything. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey, did you hear about that breach that didn't happen? Somebody really didn't mess up there, right?
We have a brief statement on this non-breach. We're happy to report there's nothing to report.
With threat intelligence, behavioral analytics, and 6,000 experts,
My dad's company wasn't hacked today.
IBM Security will help keep you out of the news.
Cool.
That's the objective. I don't think we're there by any means yet, but I think that's the area we need to be looking at is understanding our networks, understanding our security environment so that we can respond effectively and respond in a timely manner to the breaches that will inevitably happen. Thanks a lot.